Okay. Okay, very good. We are now live. Welcome, everybody. Just waiting a few seconds to let people connect. So I think we can start, and other people will join later. So welcome to the third research webinar of the program on Pacific Islands. The program is co-led by Ifri and the Pacific community. I am Céline Pajon. I'm coordinator of the program at the Center for Asian Studies at Ifri, and I will be your host today. So we will talk today about food security and food systems in the Pacific. To remind some key features of this issue, between 50 and 70% of people in the Pacific depend on agriculture and fishing activity for their livelihood. So this is quite huge. The Pacific is home to extensive crop biodiversity, and Pacific countries are developing unique value chains for markets and international supply. However, those countries also face unique challenges in realizing equitable benefits in the global food system. In addition, the Pacific needs to tackle issues like malnutrition and non-communicable diseases. Urgent global and local action is needed to manage climate change and other risks and ensure resilient food system. Also, recently, we've seen more frequent climate disasters, rising sea levels, and also the economic fallout of the COVID-19 lockdowns, as well as the global impact of the war in Ukraine, that have aggravated the challenge of food insecurity for Pacific Island countries. Europeans who are also confronted to the global food crisis are actively working with their Pacific partners to find and found solutions to address current and future risks in investing in local sustainable food systems. So this roundtable is gathering experts and practitioners from both Europe and Oceania, and we'll try to decipher the challenges of ensuring resilient food system in the Pacific and explore the opportunities to expand the cooperation with Europe. So let me first briefly introduce our great line-up of speakers today. And you should be able to see them all, almost. First, we will start with Alisi Tuqa. Alisi is the Food System Program Lead at the Pacific Community. She joined the Pacific Community in July this year, and she's leading this development and coordination of this cross-organizational initiative. Alisi was previously with the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, where she worked on a regional private sector development. Thanks a lot, Alisi, for joining us today. Second, we'll have Isolina Boto. She's a manager of Alliance and Networks at COLEACP in Brussels, and COLEACP is working toward supporting capacity building and training for producer, entrepreneur, and technicians in agricultural sectors and food systems in more than 50 African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. She was previously with CTA, the Technical Center for Agricultural and Rural Cooperation. So welcome, Isolina, and thank you for joining us. Then we'll have the Dr. Transform Aqorau. He is an international fisheries law specialist He is the CEO of iTuna Intel that provide policy advice to enhance the value and performance of Pacific Island fisheries and support right-based management. He is the former Chief Executive Officer of the parties to the new agreement, and he has indeed a long career in Pacific fisheries. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Aqorau. If you can at some point turn your camera on so that we can briefly see you, maybe during now it's a bit dark, but can see you anyway. Dr. Aqorau is joining from the Solomon Islands, so thanks a lot. Next, we'll have Patricia Valdenebro. She is the CEO of a TCI network. She's based in Spain and Bilbao, and she's the leading global network. And the TCI network is the leading global network of clusters and innovation ecosystems. There are more than 500 members that collaborate to create global connections, inspire clusters, and improve policy learning, especially for those business in the food system industry. So we are looking forward to hear more from you, Patricia. And she will speak along a colleague from the TCI network in Oceania, Mirjana Prica. She's the chair of the TCI network in Oceania. She's based in Australia, in Sydney. And she is also the managing director of the Food Innovation Australia Limited, which is a national and industry-led organization that is established by the Australian government. So we are very fortunate to have all these people from all over the world speaking from Brussels, from Bilbao, from Sydney, from the Solomon Islands, from Suva, and so on. And I'm looking forward to a great discussions. We will go directly to the panel because unfortunately the Minister Alpha couldn't make it for the recorded message, unfortunately. So we'll jump directly to the panel and start directly the discussion. And I will first ask a question, a preliminary question to each of the panelists. And you can reply and offer your preliminary remark for 10 minutes or so. And then I will make you react to each other because you are all speaking from different part of the world and different perspectives as well. So I think it would be very interesting to have your crossed views on the question we are tackling. And finally, I will open the discussion with the Q&A session. So I'm already encouraging the audience to try to think about any questions that they might have for our panelists. And please do not hesitate to write them down on the Q&A box of your Zoom windows. So now I will turn to Alisi first for the first round of remark. Alisi, if you're ready, are you here? Can you maybe turn your camera on? Excellent, very good. So Alisi, the Pacific community has established a food system flagship program that you're leading right now. Can you tell us maybe a bit more about the motivations behind such program and about the possibilities to build on the resilience in food systems in the region?
Okay, merci beaucoup, Céline. I'm actually calling from a restaurant, so I think maybe halfway I'll turn my camera off just in case my phone starts to freeze. But thank you for the opportunity to tune in this evening, and to all those that are tuning in, the listeners, and to also my fellow panelists. Bonjour, bonsoir. and Bulavinaka from Suva here in Fiji. Thank you for the question, but I think before I answer that, Céline, if I may, I'll just very quickly explain who and what SPC is. I won't make the assumption that people have managed to find out who we are in this space for a few minutes. So the Pacific Community, SPC, started in 1947. So we're an organization that's been around a fair bit. We're an international development organization. We're owned and governed by our members. So we're a membership-based organization, 27 countries and territories in the region. And as the Pacific's own scientific and technical organization, SPC brings research and expertise in multiple areas that's related to food production and food systems, including consumption, trade, and policy work, for example. And this includes work in health, climate and oceans, science, disaster and resilience, agriculture, forestry, fisheries and aquaculture, water, energy, culture, human rights, youth, gender, and statistics. And I think that's the main ones, but obviously there's lots of underlying sectors and industries that we also touch on. It's a pleasure to share about our food systems journey. It's certainly been an interesting one. And I think first and foremost, a great part of that has been the shift and adoption that's been brought about by the leadership from our members and from our executive within the organization that's really put food systems at the forefront of our work. And in retrospect, I think looking back, the biggest acknowledgement has been in recognizing that we need to work in an integrated way. I think we've used that term a lot, but I think really we've come down to the fundamental recognition that really we cannot work on a single issue, and if I may, in a single denominator kind of way. It's really part of the process now is looking at how we can do things across the organization and how we can do it better and through a series of issues, as opposed to looking at it individually, and specifically how to make a big difference and to make bigger, larger impacts, if you will. A lot of that boils down to us recognizing on the good things as opposed to the challenges, and recognizing that as a region we're in a unique position, and I think you reflected on that when you made some opening remarks around, as a region we have 50 to 70% of our people that are dependent on the land and the ocean for our livelihoods. We also recognize that 50%, which is a substantial amount of the global tuna catch, comes from our region, from a region that's sustainably managed its resources. In terms of crop diversity, our organization has a genetic bank which holds over 2,000 varieties of the region's staple crops such as yam, breadfruit, cassava, and in fact we hold the largest collection of taro varieties in the world, with 1,000 exceptions of varieties. The Pacific is also unique in that, despite the proximity of us close to the land and the sea, which are both central to our Pacific diets and culture, the region also faces high levels of disease. And again, so you had highlighted that earlier in your introduction, which has really caused a lot of premature deaths and disability. And NCDs account for 70 to 75% of deaths in the region, which is quite scary and a staggering figure. And a lot of these problems have been linked to issues around maintaining adequate and effective food systems to ensure the availability of sufficient, safe and nutritious food for everyone. And I don't think we can really talk about food security or any other issue in the region without, flagging climate change, which is ultimately or really the biggest threat to us in the region. We recognize that the changes to the frequency and impact of climate hazards, such as cyclones. We're now in the midst of the cyclone season here in the region. Floods, droughts, and storm surges have long-term impacts on food production. In the case of fisheries, I won't go into too much detail because that's Dr. Transform's expert area, so he'll touch on that. But in the instance of fisheries, we recognize that climate change has seen increases in sea temperatures, current flows, which brings about, the shifts in the distribution of marine fish stocks, for example. So we can see that some countries in the region will benefit, while some will lose out. And then to minimize and manage these losses further, and in line with resilient and food system principles, for us to start considering how to reorganize ourselves and promote shorter supply chains. The issues that's confronting us demonstrates the complexity of food systems. I think traditionally, or in a linear process, we look at it as sort of production, processing, transport, and consumption. But the broader elements encompass governance and the economics of food production, the sustainability, and the degree we waste food. That's another whole conversation about food waste and how food production affects the natural environment and the impact on individual and population health. Obviously, health outcomes is something we're really looking to address when we're looking at food systems in SBC. And all this points to the Pacific's food security and food systems being under threat, and that this will have more drastic impacts on our region if we don't address this now. And I think we recognize that and do so in a holistic and integrated way. Much of the advocacy and background in bringing together food systems has taken place over the last 2 years plus in SBC. And then last year particularly, I think saw the combination of what we'd like to, or I'd like to call big ticket items, particularly at national, regional and global levels that brought about, or that brought together food systems practitioners and the diverse stakeholders and sectors and disciplines. And this really has catalyzed momentum and commitment to applying a food systems approach to bring together sectors and different areas of expertise. And this particularly for SBC has propelled food systems as a key focus area in our strategic plan, which was endorsed last year by our members. And this has created a dedicated food system flagship or program within SBC. I think many in the audience tonight would be familiar with the Food Systems Summit that was held last year, that was hosted by the United Nations. And this really served as a historical opportunity to empower and to propel people to work toward the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and all of which rely to some degree on healthier, more sustainable and equitable food systems. We did some work through the request of our Pacific ambassadors and hosted a series of dialogues within the region and that really demonstrated the nature and the collaborative aspects of addressing complex issues such as food systems. SBC facilitated a regional food systems dialogue mid last year, and this was convened by the Minister of Health of Tonga and in partnership with the United Nations. Countries developed their national food systems pathways, and these pathways were really intended to serve as points of reference for governments and for all stakeholders, and really a document that we can refer to so that, we're not pulling things out of the air, if you will, but the needs have come from the countries, and we're reinforcing those messages and those priorities from the region. Post-Food Summit, SPC on behalf of our members has joined the Aquatic and Blue Foods Coalition of the Food Systems Summit, and that's just an example of the breadth of that. It's not just looking at agriculture, but I think a bigger focus for us in the Pacific particularly is around the blue economy and the fisheries and marine resources. And this is a platform to raise international awareness under the under-recognized contributions of the Pacific to food systems, and particularly to the aquatic and blue food system solutions. So it's really a great opportunity for us to elevate Pacific voices in this space. And I think maybe Dr. Transform might elaborate on that later on, but also Patricia and Mirjana from TCI because of the networks within Europe and the Oceania region. Integrated programming in SPC, including the food systems, is grounded in culture, in gender and in social inclusion and people-centered approaches. And I think part of work that we've undertaken over the year, particularly the last 2 years, has been around the theory of change. It's still a work in progress for us. We're still trying to navigate, how to do that a lot better within the organization. And we're trying to do that through our strategic plan and having conversations with staff across the organization, and to try and see how we can promote change for the greatest return and results. And the theory of change particularly will clearly define how we support these national pathways and address regional frameworks such as the 2050 strategy, which is a regional strategy, as well as the 20 agenda of the SDGs. I'll just very quickly end with the 2050 strategy, because I think that's something important to highlight when we're looking at regional solutions or regional pathways. And that was a document that was endorsed by forum leaders last year, and actually this year in July, sorry. And so it's something that really guides and promotes regional leadership in a lot of areas such as policy, political leadership, resource management, climate change, and the blue economy, the blue continent is something that's really fundamental to that policy. And if we're looking at food systems from a specific perspective, that's something we definitely want to concentrate on. Yeah, I think I'll end there. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take that. And I'll end it here then. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alisi. That was a great overview, and thank you for introducing what the SPC is and is doing in the field of food security. I'm sure that we'll have plenty of way to discuss and to to elaborate on what you presented. Now I will like to turn to Isolina Boto. So Isolina, the COLEACP has worked over the years supporting agriculture and export development in the Pacific. What would you say have been the 2 or 3 most prominent emerging issues that have captured the attention of COLEACP recently and was called for more investment or additional attention or activities?
Thank you very much, Céline, and thank you very much to Ifri and SPC for inviting us. And I'm very glad to join the other panelists this morning from Brussels. So basically 2 words about the COLEACP. We are a non-profit association of private sector operators along the agri-food sector, the whole chain. And we have among our membership and beneficiaries, European importers, so being European companies, and then also in sub-Saharan Africa, the Pacific, and the Caribbean. So we are across continents. The big part of our work, though, is supporting the MSMEs, so the micro, small, and medium enterprises, to better access markets. And also, we are in existence now for more than 40 years. Also, in the beginning, we focused exclusively on the exports to the EU markets. For more now that 15 years, we support still the access to the EU markets, of course, but also the local markets, regional markets, and also exports to other markets. So in the case of the Pacific, of course, to neighboring countries like Australia, New Zealand, etc. So basically, Alisi, yourself and Alisi have already mentioned many of the challenges actually that the companies and the agri-food sector, the smallholders, the producers, and then the operators along the chain are facing. They are in a complex environment which is also changing all the time. I mean, this is the food, fuel, energy, today war crisis, of course, climate change, and all these have to be tackled at the same time. And you are not required only to increase your production and your market access, but you are also, if you want to be in business, you have also to be in a very, very specific, more sustainable value chains and new markets, which are also answering demand from consumers that are more and more demanding actually, and require a lot of work for small operators, which is the core of our business. So basically, in our work, like anybody, we are recovering from COVID impacts. I mean, COVID-19 impacts. Those were obviously economic because the economy almost stopped. The tourism industry, which is of course a big buyer for smallholders and operators in the Pacific. Remittances sent from abroad, loss of employment, therefore income, etc. All the, let's say, supply, the flights, especially for, we work also on fresh foods or fresh fruits and vegetables, vegetables, etc., suddenly stopped with big logistic interruptions, and the fact also that they are very small, logistic operators in the region. So not only expensive, but also very few. So we are kind of recovering from that part. High increase, of course, on fertilizers and inputs, which are most of them imported. So what we have been advocating for many years has been to support not only organic fertilizers, so less, let's say, harmful fertilizers for the soil and for the people, but also locally made and locally produced, that you are not as you are more resilient, as not dependent as the region is, but even here in Europe, the problem we have on the dependency now. The climate change is certainly a huge problem for all, and even more in the case of small scale economies and island economies. So not only because of extreme climate events that Alisi has mentioned, the loss of arable land. We talk about small land availability. This one is even more challenged by coastal erosion, by a sea level, and extreme events, and of course also the salt water intrusion into the fields that are less available for crops, and this is really a problem. In addition to that, we have all the biosecurity risks, pathogens, of course, the pest and invasive species, which are a big threat. And therefore, we are faced with a lower, let's say, crop yields, declining soil fertility, and of course, all the agroecological diversity, a bit decline, which is one of the strengths actually of the region and the small islands. So we have to tackle the companies, and the operators have to deal with that. They have, of course, to address the crop system. At the same time, we need as the market demands, to shift towards more safe and nutritious food. You and Alisi have mentioned that, and also more sustainable production and consumption. So we have again what was the Pacific situation before these huge imports of ultra processed food, which actually are not good for almost anything. We have a bit to go back to more sustainable food for health purposes. NCDs, the non-communicable disease problem, was mentioned, and this requires as well, the sustainability requires less input into the production, but also, of course, rules on technical barriers, SPS measures, sanitary and food sanitary measures, which are critical for any market now. And we don't want just to focus on how differentiate too much the export markets to the local and regional markets, because we believe that all have to be safe and nutritious. This rhetoric that the export markets are very demanding, which they are, but you export the best and then you keep the worst for local economies is not something that is working. And we actually, most of the operators that are doing well on export markets, you also, and then serve as well local and regional markets, you see that really it increases their capacity to provide safe food. So the sustainability, not compromising on the sustainability standards is very, very important. So having said that, I mean, the Pacific, of course, countries have also a lot of, they have progressed a lot. They have done a lot in terms of differentiating products, in terms of variety, in terms of quality as well. Huge expansion on organic products, which is really, we believe, in the case of the Pacific, with small land, etc., you have really to try to focus on quality products, of course. I mean, those that have an added value in the market, but also pay more, and provide more income for the operators along the chain. And we would like to stress, Alisi mentioned it quickly, the circular economy or the bioeconomy. I mean, it's also one of the areas, not only on the sustainability part, but on the climate change part as well, while we encourage the producers to produce more because they have to feed a population, growing population. At the same time, worldwide, including in the Pacific, we throw a lot from the post-harvest losses, so from the production until the end consumer, like ourselves, who throw a lot of food as well. So this is also not an equation that is going to work a long time. So one is reducing, of course, the waste along the chain, and the other is recycling the products, so making byproducts and productive resources out of the waste. I think this is a critical part, and of course, greening, if you want, the economy. And finally, as I also mentioned before, in terms of agri-food, and I think the same for fisheries. Well, my colleague is more knowledgeable on that, but the focus on the high-end markets, be local, regional, or export, is the way to go for small islands. I mean, this entails quality products. You have to target luxury good retailers, artisanal and specialty food shops, gourmet stores, be local, be regional. This required not only quality and safety, but also strong branding, linkages with the know-how, so telling the story of the products, the territories is something, for example, that has worked very, very well in Europe. You have per region, per places, specific products where the consumer knows the producers behind, can trace. Of course, you have all the ICT part as well that my colleagues will touch on, tell the story of how this has been produced, by who, that you feel that you contribute as well to your local economy. Of course, you still need to import, like anywhere. We don't believe that, you know, a country can have all the products. So the imports are important, but not when they are harmful to health. But we believe that on the short circuits and short chains, there is much more that needs to be done locally, and much more stories to tell. So the labeling, the branding, the proximity to the consumer and the producers is something that really we believe on, and there are very great examples as well from Europe, for example, on geographical indication, so origin branded if you want products. So these are a few elements, and I think we can come back in the conversation that I wanted to highlight.
Excellent, Isolina. Thanks a lot. That was very, very interesting and very useful. And I think it was very interesting to see also the similar challenges that both the Pacific and Europe is facing, and actually how it would be interesting to have this kind of shared experience, best practices, and so on. And we can discuss more afterwards. But now we'd like to turn to Dr. Transform Aqorau. I have a question for you, Dr. Aqorau. So we cannot talk about food system in the region without talking about, of course, the Blue Pacific continent and the blue economy. And in your view, what are currently the greatest challenges to advancing effective governance of the oceans and fishery resources, and especially to safeguard the food system given the convergence of crises, and we highlight a lot of them, climate change, COVID, rising fuel and food cost, etc. So it would be very interesting to hear your view about fishery and ocean governance in the region in relation with food system.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize for the visual, the quality of the visual, but I hope you can hear me. And I also thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this important seminar. Can I just premise my response on the blue economy by stating that we live in the largest oceanic region in the world. 70%, a huge proportion of the Pacific is water. But in terms of food security and livelihood, we face a crisis. It's almost of epidemic proportions. It's a crisis that's known as non-communicable disease. So there's an irony in that while on the one hand, the Pacific is enriched by the surroundings that our people live with good seafood, reef structures, the world's largest tuna stocks. We also have some of the highest incidences of non-communicable disease in the world, which is related to food production, food security, and largely it's lifestyle. Plus, also it's got to do with I guess genetics. And the most important thing in terms of the questions that we're asking about in terms of food production, the reason is that the cost of a healthy diet, even from the sea, and I know that we tend to we perhaps maybe romanticize the idea that, you know, the Pacific Island countries live in these beautiful oceans, we have access to seafood, and but I'll tell you that right across the Pacific, from Micronesia, in Melanesia, the hospital here in Honiara, I can tell you that non-communicable disease is a huge problem. So there's a correlation between the quality of food production and its availability and its accessibility. But having said that, the blue economy, of course, is absolutely critical. The reason being that most of the countries in the Pacific depend on the oceans, on tuna, not just as a means of transportation for sea lanes, but also we sit on the largest tuna stocks in the world. The energy potential that can be provided by the ocean is huge, but that I think is negated by the fact that in terms of the health and in terms of the questions that we're discussing with respect to food and livelihood, there is a growing crisis that for me, it's almost an epidemic. Increasing young, and the reason is that the cost, it's actually cheaper for people to go and buy a packet of noodles, a packet of canned tuna, than it is to go and buy fresh fish. And I'll tell you what, that in Honiara now, it's actually cheaper for you to buy imported chicken wings, which is not really healthy, and it's fat and has huge fat content, than it is to buy fresh fish from the local market. So, you know, we're facing some really serious challenges in terms of the questions that we are actually considering in this seminar. The other challenge that I also would like to share with us also is that, and I'm sorry that I'm sort of being a bearer of bad news for us, but I think that's the reality in the Pacific. We should not hide the fact that non-communicable disease related to poor health and diet is actually killing people in the Pacific, because we're importing all these local food substitutes, and the cost of our seafood and other natural food is expensive. So the real challenge I think that we have to find is, how can we increase agricultural production given the problems that's induced by heat, and people find it, they're not going to the garden and spending as long time in the gardens as they used to when I was growing up, because it's actually getting hotter and more uncomfortable for them. And so it's harder for people to produce the same amount of food that they were producing maybe 30, 40 years ago than they are now. So the research has to be done on looking at alternatives, investing in high yield crops, looking at different ways of farming. There's also, in terms of the question on the blue economy, I think you can't decouple the ocean from forestry and agriculture. And many of our conversations that we have that relate to our marine resources are often skewed in the sense that we believe that on its own it can. I don't think so. Coastal communities are dependent on the coastal resources. Plus, there is a inextricable link between the quality of the coastal reef structures, the activities that go on land, agriculture, and also the deforestation that's going on. So we cannot talk about a blue economy in isolation of what's also taking place in agriculture and forestry. So a lot of research, a lot of work that has to be done around supporting communities. We cannot just simply go and support communities and say, we're promoting blue economy, going to invest in replenishing your coral reefs, while they find it difficult to produce enough root crops that they need to also supplement their diet. So we have, I can only say that the issues of governance are challenging us. They're being compounded by the climate change. And so we need to work together as Pacific Island countries, support each other, share that experience that we have. But also, I think it's a transfer of skills and knowledge that people need in order to be able to survive, not now, but I'm really thinking in 10, 15 years' time, the quality of life is going to get even more of a challenge than it is now. So I think therein lies quite a bit of the challenge that we face. And thank you very much. I hope you got that.
Yes, we got all of it. Thanks a lot, Dr. Aqorau. It was very, very interesting, and thank you for also underlining the very important issue of accessibility of food. Of course, that's one thing to produce and to be able to have good food, to buy it, but you need to have a decent price so that the people actually can access and can feed on it. So now I would like to turn to our colleagues from the TCI network, and I will ask Patricia and Mirjana to chip in. And I will start with Patricia. So Patricia, you're the CEO of the TCI network based in Spain. And I would be interested to learn more about what is a TCI network, how it's working, organization, goal, and how do you concretely support a business, government, and academia to act in the food systems domain. And then we will turn later on Mirjana, because she's based in Oceania, so she will have the perspective from the Oceania, and also link what's going on in Europe and in Oceania, and how to work together. So Patricia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Céline, and thank you for the invitation to Ifri, to SPC. It's a very nice occasion to exchange and to learn from all of you, on experts on the food systems. I'm going to talk from a global perspective and from the TCI network. We are a network of people and organizations working in clusters and innovation ecosystems all over the world. We have more than 500 members. And together we try to advance in the practice of clusterings. Why? Because we think collaboration is the key nowadays. We have like big challenges ahead as a society. And when I think we all have the clear mind that we need to change a bit the economic framework and the economic model that we have. We need to go towards a more sustainable, inclusive model. And we think collaboration is the way to go. So that's what most of our members, where most of our members are working, on collaboration to help SMEs. And I know in the food system sectors and the agri-food sectors, micro companies and sometimes individual producers are like the core of your business, and that's a different business. So we need to understand that people is at the center of the collaboration, and we need to work with the people. So we strengthen the capacities of the members of the clusters is what we are, most of our members are working. A lot of mentoring, coaching, understanding the needs, channel the support that sometimes is there, but it's difficult for them to get to know how many things are available. You know, there are many layers of public support that may be accessible, but we need to translate all that into the reality of the producers. Also think bigger, you know. I think sometimes these small units need to make connections in local networks, in international networks, and that's the way to get to more international value chains, you know, to more international markets, to have a more clear brand, you know, as also putting more in value the region they come from, and also helping to brand the territory or a place. This is all what we are talking in TCI. I have more examples I can talk to you later. You asked me about the European examples. I understand the question. I always say there are not good and bad examples. We have good and bad strategies, and everybody works what we have, you know, in our environment. And of course, the environments are very different. What I'm hearing from you in the south and what we have in Europe is perhaps different, but in the end, I think the challenges are all the same for all of us. You know, we need to work more on missions of our society, to think more what is needed in the end, and to work with those big missions. And we think the only way is to collaborate more, to have more sustainable structures that we call them cluster organizations, to help to put this collaboration in place and to have more impact and more social value for all of us. I'm going to hand over to Mirjana because she's our specialist in the food systems in Australia, and she's bringing a lot of these examples to the global perspective as well. And well, as I said, very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Mirjana, hand over to you.
Thanks a lot, Patricia. Yes, I'm now turning to Mirjana from Sydney. So can you tell us more about the TCI Oceania and how the TCI network in Europe and partners are collaborating together and supporting the TCI Oceania and Pacific private sector in the food system? And then I will go to everyone on the panel to push you a little more on the element that you presented. Mirjana.
Thank you, Céline, and thank you, Patricia, and thank you particularly to Alisi and SPC for the opportunity to be here today. So greetings from down under, Sydney, Australia. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging the Cadigal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we are virtually gathering here today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and in the future. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today on this webinar. My colleague Patricia has provided a really great overview of the TCI network, which I'm a director of on the global network. But I want to just touch on really the TCI Oceania chapter and what we are doing down here. The chapter started informally about 7 to 8 years ago, but we recently have formalised it, and we're really trying to support and advocate on behalf of clusters and cluster practitioners across Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and the Pacific Islands to develop a vibrant, inclusive innovation ecosystem across the Oceania region. We see clusters as the platform for collaboration, and it's really important at a regional level. Every region around the world operates and has different challenges. So we feel it's really important that we customise it to our context. We have a working committee. They have extensive experience and knowledge. They have been cluster practitioners themselves, but they also have taught, and they've had experience and knowledge that they bring through their just being exposed to different clusters around the world. We've been really fortunate. We've secured some funding, and this funding has allowed us to have a secretariat function. And what we're trying to do is really drive momentum and drive awareness over the last 12 months since we've gotten this funding. Our aim is to drive awareness of clusters and the benefits of collaboration and cooperation. And we want to drive engagement that will lead to big investments and big projects that will help us to support the economic development and growth in the region. So now I'm going to switch my other hat on and now bring that down to the food context and in particular, Australia's food and agribusiness context, because I'm the managing director of an organisation. It's a not-for-profit organisation, and we're really here to support. But I want to support the Australian food and agribusiness sector, but I want to talk about how the TCI network in Europe and its partners and collaborating and supporting the TCI Oceania and the Pacific private sector better, how it will help the food system perspective. And in particular, I want to touch on how clusters can actually help with the impacts of climate change on food security. Here in Australia in particular, we've had the frequency of some really extreme events. You've all heard about droughts and floods, and we've just been on a constant seesaw. It's just amazing, but it's highlighted the vulnerability of our food system, and it is vulnerable. It's not just the Pacific Islands, the food systems are vulnerable all around the world. So let me share some statistics about our sector here in Australia. Today, we have 180,000 businesses that operate across the food and agribusiness sector in Australia. Australia is a very large geographical area. We're the 6th largest country by landmass in the world. Those 180,000 businesses, most of them are SMEs. They're very small. They don't have the economies of scale to operate. And that's a real challenge for us. Collectively, those businesses produce enough food to feed 4 to 5 times Australia's population of 25 million. And if we reduce the calorie intake, we could really stretch that further and feed many more mouths. Australia is a net exporter of food, and we export about 70% of what we grow and produce. Because of the different growing conditions across Australia, and because we're a large country, we often can supply crops all year round. And if particular one area is impacted by climate change, if there's a drought in one location or there's a flood, it's invariably that the East Coast or the West Coast don't have the same conditions. So that means we can grow generally all year round. And this means that also we can produce most of the food that goes on our plate today. But climate change does impact. It impacts the water availability. It impacts the yields. It impacts the nutritional value. It impacts how we store food, but also importantly, how we transport it. And we can't, if there's floods, we can't get the product from where it's grown to where it needs to be processed. And in Australia, most of the processing takes place on the east coast of Australia, because that's where most of the people live. And so 80% of what we grow and produce is processed on the east coast of Australia. And when there's a flood, we cannot transport it across. This climate change also impacts prices. When there are droughts, prices go up. When there's a floods, prices go down because you have more crop. So it really does impact it. But this price impacts the livelihoods of people because they live in the regional areas where the agriculture takes place, and they rely on this income to survive. But a real key challenge, a key challenge for all of us is around how do we sustainably, how do we ensure our food system is sustainable into the future, and how do we produce sustainably? And a key challenge of our sector and many other sectors in Australia, and I'm sure it's other places around the world, is we don't collaborate. We have a poor culture of collaboration. And this is really causes a lot of challenges of how do we ensure we have a sustainable food system in Australia. So in 2013, when we established our organisation, we identified clusters as a critical mechanism to address the challenge of poor collaboration in our country, but address the challenge of having a large number of small companies. How do we get the economies of scale to help those small businesses access knowledge, access capability and capacity, and the connections to be able to play on a global stage? So we turned to Europe. Europe have been using clusters for many years for economic growth and development. And we wanted to turn to them, which is where I met Patricia many years ago, not many years ago, we were still quite young, Patricia, but we met some of the cluster practitioners across a number of different countries. And we felt that was really important to go to different countries. Australia as a context is very different. We have a large geographical area. We have a large number of SMEs. We have a large we have usually 2 or 3 large companies and tend to be multinationals that dominate subsectors within the food system. That causes a lot of problems because it stifles competition. In Europe, you have different challenges because you have competition is you're at your doorstep, whereas for us, we have 2 or 3. So we knew that in the European model, we couldn't just pick it up and drop it into the Australian context. We had to take the best of each of the countries and tweak it and make it relevant. And that's what we have been doing in Australia. We still continue to do that. We also didn't get hung up on the word cluster, and we used the principles of collaboration that the TCI network used to really drive cluster development and creation across the country. We also understood the important ingredients for success. We said there's 2 really key things that are important. Find that common purpose and that burning platform, which is going to bring people together to unite. And you need a champion to drive the actual development of that common purpose. Over a course of 6 years, we've built an ecosystem of mini clusters across the country. And they're all working on different challenges and growth opportunities across Australia. We have a network of about 13 clusters. They reach thousands of SMEs across the country, and we're just about to launch a new cluster in wine next week. They all share knowledge amongst each other. We're working together to build the capability and capacity and the confidence, but we're also creating connections to resources, connections to opportunities, and they really are going places. What we found by investing in people to run these cluster organizations, what we call the soft infrastructure, that we have trust is established, relationships deepen, and this has led to some great things. These little mini ecosystems are now investing in big infrastructure projects. They're investing in facilities. They're investing in innovation hubs. They're investing in processing. And this is really, and millions of dollars are going in to really help drive those and support those SMEs. That social connectedness, that glue, what we call it, was really important during COVID. And it was really quite interesting. Local governments in the regions were disconnected to the local stakeholders, their businesses in their regions. And what we found was everyone was turning to those little clusters that we have set up for intelligence of what was going on in their region and how could they help them, particularly in times of crisis. And we didn't have a rule book during COVID. We just had to react because we didn't know, and we had never experienced this before. And just to give you some examples, we had one cluster where they used the labour that was available when restaurants were closing. They used that labour force and redirected it to help agricultural farmers pick the fruit and vegetables because it was destined to landfill. Clusters also shared their intelligence across the ecosystem, and millions of kilograms of food was diverted from food waste. And that really was important to be diverted to food rescue organisations to help those that were food insecure. And there are many more examples, what I'll touch on. And finally, I just want to touch on what are the opportunities for collaboration between Europe, the Pacific and Oceania. There's 3 perspectives. The first is we can share knowledge of what has worked well, what hasn't worked well, so we can learn from those failures and so we can actually fast track it. We're all faced with the same issue, that there'll be less resources, but there'll be many more mouths to feed by 2030. So how do we use our scarce resources more wisely? Europe has 15 times the population of the Oceania region, 750 million people to 45. You have 53 countries, we have 14 countries in the region. Your landmass and our landmass is very similar. So we can learn a lot. You know, you're quite concentrated, we aren't. We have a lot of water, you have a lot of land. So I think there's lots of learnings that can be shared. We also, how do we build capability and capacity? Europe has been using clusters as a mechanism for collaboration for many years. You've developed tools, you've got best case practices, case studies on best practice. So how do we accelerate these learnings and adoption for the region? Similar to what I just described earlier, you know, we went to Europe and we fast-tracked our knowledge of clusters by just picking the brains of the best in Europe. And it's the same way we can do that here. And finally, I want to touch on creating connections around market development and growth opportunities, supply and demand. What do we have that Europe doesn't have and vice versa? And supply chains are continually being disrupted, and with geopolitical tensions, this is only going to become more important. And I just want to touch on the last thing is food waste. And it really highlights how we can cooperate and collaborate to really accelerate each other's learnings and get there. Australia was very slow to adopt and sign up to the 12.3 Sustainable Development Goal. And how do we reduce food waste by half by 2030? Today, Australia has 7.6 million metric tonnes of waste that we produce. That's equivalent to 10 big stadiums filled of food waste. That's a hell of a lot of food waste, which is approximately 300 kilograms per person. Or it takes 25 million metric tonnes of, so it takes 25 million hectares of land to actually grow this food. It's an $18 billion Australian opportunity, and collectively that results in 3% of Australia's carbon emissions. So if we tackle food waste, we'll also impact climate change too. We're slow to start, but what's quite interesting today, 5 years after we've started the journey, the rest of the world is now turning to us. We worked with Europe, we went to Europe, we learned what Europe had been doing, we took some resources, the capability, we brought it back to Australia. We are now leaping ahead and accelerating, and now they're turning to us to learn from what are we doing so they can learn from us. So I think there's lots of opportunities for us to collaborate and to learn from each other and to use clusters as a mechanism to create the economies of scale to help those small businesses be successful on a global stage and have a sustainable food system.
Thank you, Mirjana. A very positive note to end on. So I would like to push you maybe a little more on what you said about the what is going on in the Pacific Island, in the region, about the experience or the solution that could be found to reduce the food waste or to try to enhance more sustainable food system. Would you be able to provide some concrete examples of that? And I would also turn to the other panelists on this. I would be interested to hear about very concrete examples of cooperation between Europe and Oceania on this, or concrete good practices that can be easily shared either in Europe or in Oceania. Another question I would like to ask all the panelists is really to highlight again, why is it important? What is the interest of the Europeans and the Oceanians to look at each other and to cooperate with each other? Of course, we have the similar kind of challenge, but we have different kind of condition, and as many of you explained, we have complementarities, and where are the most value added for this kind of cooperation? Where should be the priority to develop this cooperation and this system? I might add one question about the accessibility of food and maybe forward looking. I was thinking about the younger generation. How do you see how the younger generation, both in Europe and Oceania, but maybe more in Oceania, what are their habits regarding food? I guess what are their choice? How they consume food? Do they have a kind of very strong feeling about cultural food, way to cook local product and so on? Or do they go to the cheapest product in a supermarket or imports and so on? I know that this is a very very important factor to look at. But how do you see the younger generation, relations with these food questions, and maybe also their interest to to work on agricultural or fisheries domain areas and try to find a new solution. Also, is it something that is of interest? Is it something that is attractive or rather not? So that's a lot of questions. We have a bit less than 25 minutes to discuss all this. So I will go back maybe to Alisi, if you agree, to try to address this question or some of this question. How many questions you would like?
Okay, sure. I'll try and answer it. Well, I'll try and answer the one around diets, and particularly for young people. I guess the trend. I think that's something we perhaps need to look into a lot more. But I think Dr. Transform kind of touched on that around the whole issue of the affordability and access to healthier foods, and I think that fundamentally is a big challenge for the region, and culturally too. I think it's understanding and recognizing that a lot of young people, I guess it's not like perhaps the other parts of the world when you perhaps reach 18, you move out and you get a job and you flat out and so on. It's not quite the same here. A lot of people do remain within an extended family or remain in the same household, so you will be consuming what everyone else consumes. And I guess there needs to be a lot more research around that, and particularly where people are sourcing their foods from. And I know I've been talking to some partners around, mapping that type of work. Is it generally, so if you're in sort of the urban, peri-urban areas, it's really from the supermarkets or the local supermarkets and small pockets of markets that sell fresh produce and seafood. But as you perhaps go further out, you might be getting that from, local farmers or other farmers, or even from families, or you grow your own. So that a big part of that work is really just to try and understand where people are sourcing their food from and what the diet, their preferred diet. But I think a big part of it also now is, just to throw a bit more complexity to the conversation, is the convenience. I think people, the lifestyle, I think again, Dr. Transform mentioned that, is lifestyle is such that, people are rushing from place to place. You consume with lots of things now that, convenience is really a big part of the discussion also is, so you see a shift of that in business. A lot of, you go to the supermarkets, people are pre-cutting vegetables, and there's lots more of those types of things available at the supermarket, more value addition to local produce, and those types of things. But I think it's where you're trying to ensure that there's access to healthier foods. I think the conversation from what was food security to now food systems demonstrates that. Years ago when we were talking about food security, was access to, food production, but calorie intake particularly. But now we recognize that there's lots of consumption, but the calorie intake is actually really low, and not very nutritional. So I think that's part of the discussion that I think we all have to address as communities. The second question, which I think you had posed first, was around, the collaboration learnings between the Pacific and Europe. And in the region, we have a lot of European funded, projects within the region. So the European, region and the European Union is a big partner and a stakeholder in a lot of the work we do in this part of the world. So that's important. We have embassies and missions that are based in Europe. So collaboration is key. There's, trade ultimately is the biggest agenda around that. So there's lots of opportunities for us to expand on that. I think a big part of it also is around capacity building. I think I think all the speakers have touched on capacities and capabilities. That's still, something that we look to, not just Europe, but other parts of the world where we can collaborate. Technology and access to, those types of technology that's available, particularly in infrastructure, whether it's water, energy, and those industries that, can help us identify solutions in issues such as, energy, power, climate change. issues. So there's lots of opportunities. I think we just need to identify what that is and what's practical and applicable to us in the region. And I think Isolina had mentioned that. We've had Mirjana, that you can't just cut and paste and take something that's working in Europe or other parts of the world to the Pacific. You've got to contextualize it and localize it to be relevant to this part of the world.
Very good, Alisi. Thanks a lot. Now, Isolina, would you like to reply to some of the questions?
Yes, so perhaps I will take the food waste. Well, the food waste, there are many components. It's all complex, of course, but first it has to be economic, you know, just by telling people don't waste. I mean, if it was as simple, we wouldn't have started to waste, and this is all of us. So the economic part and the incentives are not to minimize. But number one, and we keep saying that, you know, for some of us who are in development for many years, so basically who are old, is repeating the same thing. Is processing. You know, by processing already you cut a lot of food waste. We talk about fruits, vegetables, let alone fish. I mean, fresh products for which the logistical aspects and others, or the time you get from the production side to the market, you know, makes it rooted. Basically, that's where post-production starts. So, and also, as I was mentioning before, the income part, processed food gives you more money than just fresh food. That is a fact. So processing is a big part, and I think the Pacific, as well as other parts in the world, has to increase the processing facilities and processing food. Another part, of course, and we have many examples to share of MSMEs. Again, it's not big companies. This is to mean, I have nothing against big companies, but it means that it's accessible. We talk again about accessible, is using the food waste, be mangoes, be pineapples, whatever, into bioorganic fertilizers, into energy, with simple technologies, you know, which are locally made or have been imported or transferred, but now are locally made, which are accessible to smallholders and small companies, because it's critical as well. And that relates to the point of youth, which is in all the countries, is the next generation you want in agriculture, and you want to show that the sector is innovative and remunerative. I mean, if not, they will not come just by telling them to come. It's a great work to do on smallholders linking to MSMEs. For whatever reason, sometimes they are in parallel, and smallholders remain in the low base, let's say, part, and MSMEs are very often run by young people that are not necessarily coming from the agriculture sector. You know, they just see an opportunity in that sector, and we have to have those two working more on the for example, all the bioenergy and circular economy. It's all startups, young, you know, enterprises, even in Europe, where they start by an economic model. I mean, of transforming waste into a byproduct, into a new product, etc. So there we have many examples to share from Europe, and of course other parts of the world as well. Perhaps we didn't underline enough the role of women. I mean, the role of women in agriculture and agri-food sector, and there is a question in the chat. I mean, I mean, none of the SDGs will be met without more investment into women. I mean, that is a fact, and it's everywhere, and it includes the Pacific. So this from production, they are very, very often in the lowest, again, you know, part of the chain, and we have to move them all in at all levels. And for all the topics we spoke about, there is something that some lessons can be taken from Europe, is that you need also policies, and you need incentives, and sometimes you need subsidies. I know that there was a big antagonism to subsidies, but even the countries that in Europe, where again subsidies are the first ones subsidizing now that we have the Ukraine and other crises. So subsidies doesn't mean that you will help the people all their life. No, it means in a particular context, in a particular time, you need an incentive that people either get into a sector or get out of another sector where you want them to move on. So this is still critical. I mean, whatever ideology we are. And the last point I want to also highlight is the e-commerce. The e-commerce in the region needs, I think, to be, the COVID has demonstrated some examples at some scale. It doesn't need to be, big companies again, be with payments online or sometimes without payments online. But it has shown not only some creativity, but reducing food losses, because you can anticipate and plan better with different parts, and of course the use of ICTs, which is critical. I mean, you can't avoid that today. If not, you are just out of the economic sector. And finally, of course, finance, we haven't mentioned, but the access to finance, especially to MSMEs, there is a missing middle in finance. There is finance everywhere. I mean, they tell you there is money everywhere, and there is. On the other hand, those who need to access it can't, because it's really the missing middle where they don't need millions. They need sometimes very small quantities, which is also beyond microfinance. And this is a huge gap. And this is a very critical, because the companies in the Pacific especially are also very small, and this needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thanks, Isolina. Very clear, very useful point for more cooperation. So we need to address very specific points, and that's really good. I have also many questions in the chat for Mr. Aqorau, but I'm afraid his internet connection is unstable, so he left us for now. I'm so sorry about it. So I will turn to Patricia and Mirjana to hear their thought about my question, and then if anybody is confident enough to add some element to the questions that were directed to Dr. Aqorau on regional fisheries, and the role of the EU or European actors in the regional fisheries. Have there been some constructive player or not? What are the opportunities for collaboration? You're most welcome to chip in. So Patricia.
Yes, I would like to bring another perspective of, and I think here in Europe it's working quite well, the cross-cluster collaboration, and I think maybe this is also a way to look at many of the challenges that you might have in the food system sector. You need to look at other ecosystems, let's say, and see how to collaborate with them, or how to make business together. I'm talking about, for example, the logistics or chemical sectors or robotic sectors now with all the drones and all these systems. About water, with the water clusters, for example, how to make a good use of water. I don't know, there are many different ways to look at the business, and usually needs connections with other clusters. And I think in this sense, Europeans are very eager to find new unexpected connections. So you might open new paths for collaboration there also from the Pacific Islands. And the other part is the mix of policies that are needed also to tackle many of the challenges. We have in Europe, it's specifically rich environment with local policies, national policies, European policies, helping business in different way. I think this mix of policies, of R&D, of internationalization, of technology transform, of local ecosystem development and things like that, is something that I see is needed in some other parts of the world, where the public support goes in a very concrete direction, and it's difficult to benefit or to reach the final beneficiaries like that. So I think this is something that maybe we could work together, the two regions, on how to adapt better the public policies.
And just to touch on what Patricia said around policies, in Australia, we actually don't have a cluster policy. So what we have done is we've gone from the bottom up. So we have naturally formed these clusters without having a cluster policy. So I think the message is sometimes you can't wait for policy. Sometimes you have to let market forces take control, and these ecosystems build naturally, but you do need them. So I call it top down and bottom up approach, and they need to be working in tandem. So because sometimes policies and to get legislation through governments can take time. So I think, you know, we can learn from each other about particularly what we are doing in turning to Europe in terms of your policy perspective, and you're governed at many different levels. So we've been turning to them, but we've started because we can't wait for government to get their act together. So we're just getting on with it to try and make it happen. But I just want to touch on a couple of other things that in terms of, I suppose, talking about food waste, but just in general around clusters, I think two things. One, you need data. You know, you need data and you need tools. One of the things that we found with food waste is you got to know where the food waste is. If you know where the food waste is, then you know where the challenges are, and then you can work out what are the solutions you need to deploy. So, for example, when I talk about food waste in Australia, a third of the food waste is wasted at the consumer end. So people tend to buy too much. Why? Because we've been taught, go to the supermarket, but plan for your week, and therefore we waste a lot. So, you know, so what we've been doing in Australia is trying to educate consumers that, well, you don't have to buy as much, and therefore you can buy as you need it. So that should try and cut some of the consumer waste. And we've turned to the United Kingdom, which is still a part of Europe and not part of the European Union, so we won't go there. But they actually have some great policies that we actually deployed. First of all, you need to have a baseline. If you understand your baseline of data across your whole value chain, you can then start to monitor it over a period of time. So the first thing we did in Australia was to develop a baseline, because we thought, well, where do we start from? How big is our problem, and where is the problem? And then what we did was we said, right, now that we know where the problem is, what are the types of return on investments that we need to do feasibility studies to actually try and address some of the food waste, depending on where it is in the value chain. And then what we've then done is deployed practices that they've deployed, such as a voluntary food pact. The voluntary food pact is where companies volunteer to try and drive a reduction in the food waste. And that can be driven from the retailers, particularly because they can have an impact. And they were very successful in having a reduction, and we have now started that journey as well in Australia, and we're starting to see the result of that. And just to touch on the last point around the younger generation, you've got to start very young. You've got to start in educating. You've got to start when the kids are really small, in primary school, high school, and demonstrate the value of food. Try and change the behaviours around food, how they purchase, how they eat, what's nutrition, because unfortunately a lot of kids don't understand where the nutritional parts of food, and therefore, you know, it becomes harder to actually control their diet as they get older because they've developed bad practices. So I think there are some things that we can do, but it does take time, and education and raising awareness are really important.
Great, Mirjana. Thanks a lot. Thanks all of you for the recommendation that you made, the points that you made that will be very useful to indeed trigger more cooperation in the future. And we have a few minutes left, and a new question popped up in a chat. So I would like to give you all the chance for final words and maybe to address this last question. It's about how it is to, is it appropriate to work with international organizations such as the UN FAO, the food UN Food Organization, to promote more the voice and challenges of Pacific states? Would it be an interesting way to work for the Pacific states? Alisi, would you like to try to address this question?
Sure. Okay, I'll do it. Well, the FAO, I mean, they have an office here in Samoa. I mean, just because he's referenced FAO, I'll just pick on that. And also in Fiji. So, there's presence of, agencies like FAO and the other UN agencies, but obviously there's, lots more development partner type agencies. And a lot of them are membership-based organizations. So the issues of the Pacific or their concerns, there's a mechanism there that exists. So Pacific states are part of these groups. So, when you have your meetings, that's when a lot of the issues are taken across. As a region, of course, we try and come together to ensure that, we consolidate our issues. I mean, that's why we have those regional strategies and policies. So, we've already kind of documented them. And we try and position ourselves as a region when it comes to advocating, what we want addressed at regional and at global level. So, and also we've got, SPC is a technical agency. We have our own line ministries and reporting, ministerial meetings that we report to. We also have a governing council. And we've got other regional organizations also that have similar structures. And, we use that mechanism, if you will, to ensure that we, validate the issues that we take across and use that, whether it's the UN or in the EU, the ACP in Brussels, where Isolina is based. So that's already something that's, that's taking place and continues to happen. And of course, a lot of the countries also have their own bilateral arrangements. So that's, obviously a sovereign issue, and that's specific to particular countries. But as a regional organization, that's why we have regional entities, and we come together, when we have regional meetings, and we are very clear about the positions that we have and go through those events and conferences or whatever else that comes up relating to those. And again, it depends on the sectors. Of course, FAO is more specific to food, but then it varies across different issues and sectors. I'm not sure if that answers it, but if he hasn't, I'll try and elaborate again.
Can I just add to Alisi's comment and just to sort of elaborate to say, I think we all should be advocating and working together, and it's not just one channel, it's multiple channels. So, I think the more voices, we can't always assume that everyone understands the challenges. And I can tell you now, a lot of people in Australia aren't aware of some of the challenges. They are, but some aren't. So I think to answer the question, the more channels we have of raising the challenges that everyone's facing to the surface, I think it's going to help us to come together to address some of those challenges. So it won't hurt, as I would say. The more, the merrier.
Yeah, no, that's true, Mirjana. And I think, and it's funny because even just today, we've been going through a workshop looking at, gender issues or gender flagship within the organization. And I think that brings to the fore that, it's not just about governments and where they're represented in these types of meetings and platforms. And that's where the roles of, civil society or non-state actors, as I think most of the EU facilities refer to. So that includes, academia, private sector, and civil society. And I think that whole inclusivity, which you've just touched on, so if we're wanting to address, these challenges that confront us around food systems, climate change, it's not just the government's role and responsibility to do that. It's on all of us, but we've got to be able to identify where everyone has a role, where you can play a role and where you can be empowered to make decisions, to contribute, and also be resourced. I think you can play a part, but I think there's also disparities if you're not, resourced to be able to contribute and play a part in lots of this work.
And I think just Alisi too, just to add, social media, in the old days, we relied on membership organisations and government organisations to raise awareness, but the power of social media is amazing. And so I think we have platforms that we can do that to actually raise particular issues. So I think it's important that we use all the tools to hand to actually raise the awareness.
Yeah, I think you're right. Mirjana. Isolina, would you have some final words?
Just one thing to add is on these skills and knowledge. It was mentioned many times that the small operators and smallholders and all of us, but even more if you are not just in front of your screen the whole day, is that you don't need necessarily today to be high specialist on something, but you need to continuously along your life, professional life, business, reskill constantly, because it's too competitive, the environment is too competitive, so it's something that you have to go everywhere. And any of our organizations, of course, bring a small little piece to it. And there are a few more opportunities online, etc., certainly from the European part as well, that operators in the Pacific can access to. But this is critical. I mean, is anything, is a conference, is a training courses, you really have to go for that. If not, it's very difficult to follow. And the last point on one of the question on fisheries, if our colleague is not here, without going into details at all about the fisheries agreements between the EU and the Pacific, but certainly a positive part, which is what we today are concentrating on, of the EU market on fisheries, whatever other criticism you might have, is the certification, the traceability and the quality. And like for agriculture, and of course, this has been a long battle in Europe too. It's not something that has been happening overnight. It has been Parliament, it has been civil society, as Alisi was saying, it has been all the non-state actors as well, putting a lot of pressure. You know, that is a resource that is common and is declining. And therefore, we have to know as consumers that, is not just eating more fish, is making sure where the fish comes, how it has been fished, with which techniques, etc. Because if not, it's a danger that we will have no more. The EU market is certainly leading on the sustainability part and certification. And I think for the Pacific, which relies so much on fish, it's critical. It's not about selling the fish to, very low prices to anybody. I strongly believe on that. I think you have to look really at high value again. That I would underline that. Yes.
Yes, that's excellent, Isolina. Yes, the issue of standards and norms is really critical on all that. So, Patricia, would you like to have the final word?
The final word, I would like to make an invitation to participate in our next global conference next year in November 8 to 10, and it will be also in an island in Iceland. And it's also a place with many connections to what we are talking today. They also have an ocean cluster that I recommend you to follow with the same questions that are on the table, how to work with 100% fish. That's one of their projects, and technologies, green and sustainable processes and so on. So I think it could be a place very interesting for you to tackle with. They also have a very high level tourism cluster. I think the connections also between agri-food and tourism in terms of experiences, as you were saying, Isolina, before, it's something to look at. So I think it could be a nice place to have first an idea of the cluster world, and then to make specific connections for your businesses. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patricia. So if there is no burning follow-up remark after that, I would like to thank you again for this very fruitful and very dynamic discussion this morning on this important subject that is, I think, not enough covered in academia or think tanks discussions. So we end up with an all-female panel after Dr. Aqorau left, which is also a good signal, I believe. So thanks a lot again. I would like to remind that a briefing will be published in the coming weeks on the basis of this discussion. So please look forward to it. I would like to thanks again the Pacific community and indeed Alisi for this very precious support. I would like also to thank Olivier Auguin, who is the representative of the SPC in Europe. And I would be we will be very happy to see you all again next year for new events and papers regarding the Pacific Islands and the cooperation with Europe. And in the meantime, I wish you all a very happy year-end festivities with your family and closed one, and see you next year. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.